So this week, we stand on the loftiest of EL peaks as we join Emerson, Lake and Palmer for their creative pinnacle, 1972's Trilogy. Hello everyone, and welcome back to a sort of young person's guide to prog rock. I am your host, Ian Prize. So when we last left ELP, the boys had just finished their debut album. They then went off to make the surprise live hit album, Pictures at an Exhibition, a rocked-up adaptation of Modest Mogorsky's tone poems, Pictures at an Exhibition, and they went on to make the high-concept album Tarkus. They then went back into the studio for 1972 to record Trilogy. So in my humble opinion, Trilogy is where it all comes together for ELP. They'd clarified their sound, they're using their bombastic and controlled, fairly sane bursts, giving space for each member to shine. It's also one of those albums that is just pure unadulterated prog. There's virtuostic instrumentation, a variety of influences, ambitious songs, but between the ballad From the Beginning, Sheriff, and Hoedown, there is enough space to actually breathe and have some fun. So ELP have always been the divas of prog, and whilst that can be a lot sometimes, when they are on form, they can really turn it up. And here to turn it up with me today, I'm joined by Ed. Hello, Ed.
Hey, Ian. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, and I am joined by Brian.
How we doing?
I'm doing fabulous. And also, joining us from the ethereal realm is Ryan Robison. So Ryan is going to communicate with us today by Ouija board.
Wowzers.
So I'm going to divine his hot takes one letter at a time and interject him in this. No, so Ryan is faxed in his notes from the Seattle office. So he'll drop in note-wise with us today. So I guess I will start with you, Brian. Tell me about your history with this album and or ELP.
Well, Ian, when you, me, and Ryan were in college, I always thought this was a U2 album. I like ELP, I like some hits, but I always kind of associate with you guys. I don't know if we can put this in like the notes somehow, but I'd love a picture of Ryan when he was in college because he kind of looked like Greg Lake with his long hair. He straightened it a few times.
I'll find a way to get this out. Yeah.
Which this would be a fun, like, our three faces, like, you know, doing the pose.
I actually feel like we looked like Emerson, Lake and Palmer because I was beardless at the time too.
Oh God, that's.
Okay.
But
okay.
Re-listening to this for the first time in quite a while, I would say this is by far my favorite ELP album. I did also re-listen to their debut and Tarkus in preparation. And Ian, you said it very well in the beginning. They don't quite have it in the first two, and I think this really does come all together. I think you still get some of those lows of ELP, some of the excess, but I think what they're good at, they're really good at here. You know, it's referencing classical or standards, you know, like Hoedown and things like that. So I really like this. It's pretty fun, and I'm glad we're doing it.
Excellent. So Ed, tell me about your experience with this album.
So, not a massive ELP fan. I've not really heard a lot of their music, just the odd hits here and there. But then, having done some deep diving recently, this is serious prog, and there's loads to hear in here. I've heard it through like loads over the last couple of weeks, and it's been an absolute pleasure. There's all sorts going on. There's loads to talk about. I think one of the first satisfying things about this album, like normally, when I listen to music, it's just playing on free speakers in the house. But when I sit down to listen to these tracks in preparation, I always have my headphones on. And production in the 70s in stereo is normally just bonkers.
Yeah.
But for this album, I just felt like actually everything's sat in its place and it's beautifully mixed. And it wasn't too jarring as I'm used to. But I really enjoyed it.
Interestingly, building on that point, so Greg Lake said that this was his favorite album. I think the only thing that him and I believe Keith Emerson have also mentioned is that he thought there were too many overdubs. And I think they did this with two 24-track tape machines. And I'll take him at his word, but I actually don't hear 48 tracks.
No, me neither.
Like, I actually never think that there's too many tracks on this album. I think there's obviously a lot of sound, but I never feel like, oh my God, where are all these, instruments coming from?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of places where you can hear multiple layers, but sometimes you may hear the same instrument through a few sources. A few mics pointed at an instrument from different angles, so that gives you different layers and textures as well. But yeah, I see what you mean. Obviously, it's very busy, but it's not overly busy with instrumentation.
Instruments, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just busy with Keith Emerson.
Yes, busy keys, busy fingers.
Well, did you read the liner notes of all the instruments that Emerson is credited with?
Go for it.
The Hammond C3 organ, Steinway piano, the Zurna or Zukra, the Moog synthesizer, and the Mini Moog.
So he did go to town.
Yes.
It sounds like a band who's been doing interesting stuff on stage. There are like lots of periods in this where it feels like this is for the stage. They thought about what this is going to look like, and there's some stuff on here where I think it doesn't always tie together as really good sort of fuel for a good album. But I suppose we'll touch on that as we go through the tracks. But yeah, it does feel like it's to be presented. It's to be done on stage.
No, I mean, you flag up a point that I had flagged up in the last ELP episode about their debut is something to keep in mind about this band is they're basically their first real concert ever was Isle of Wight Festival, 500,000 people, and they never stopped. Like, they were a massive on-the-stage band from day one, and so I think they're designed in a lab to do that. So there's no feeling ever that they ever played at in a tiny little club. And I was going to say, actually, can you imagine going to a club, some little club in the 1970s, and then ELP come out and just like blast your face with the Hammond or whatever?
It would literally take your face off, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they can't be contained. So we start with the Endless Enigma. So Endless Enigma, 2-part song with a little fugue in the middle by Keith Emerson. As we talked about, they start with this little creeping intro with the little windpipey instrument. And it's an interesting choice for how huge the song's going to be. I don't know why they started with like a little wheelie, 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 wheelie. Because then the organs blast on in, and then we're there. So I think this might be an ELP signature song. Again, in the last episode, I had talked about how weird it is that their signature song ended up being Lucky Man, which is entirely unrepresentative about who ELP were musically. I think this is a lot more in line with what they do. So they've got the organs, they've got Greg, they've got Carl going nuts, and then they've got like a keyboard breakdown that goes on for 2 minutes. It's a lot more of what ELP actually does. So first up, did you have any feelings about the sound of Endless Enigma?
This might be a cop-out answer, but to me, this feels like the sound is the classic ELP sound. I think it's the right mix of the organs, the Greg Lake vocals, and I just think it fits just squarely in that golden era, which it's probably a cop-out.
No, I'd say that's exactly how I feel about the whole thing.
For me, this is really interesting because that song, Lucky Man, was how I knew them. So then putting on this album and this being the first track and getting to that bit in the song with the please and the crushing organ, it's almost got the power of some kind of Marshall stack, guitar amp or something. It's got that sort of dramatic element to it. It was just like that.
The wall of sound.
Yeah, and it was like, wow, okay, this is prog.
It's arrived.
Yeah, and like the drums as well, like the bass drum, it literally sounds like a battering ram trying to take down some castle wall or something. It's monstrous.
Yeah.
Monstrous. But yeah, like what sounds like over the top, Endless Enigma in its 2 parts with the fugue in the middle sounds like it's on purpose.
Yep.
It sounds like it's actually on purpose. So the way I heard it, it's obviously it's the same song, but it's like Emerson's playing more the organ, and that's the main instrument in the first Enigma. Whereas the second Enigma, he's going for more the wild Moog synth lines, and it's having that fugue in the centre of it, breaks those those two ideas up.
Bits up, yeah.
And I think it also brings the bass playing into the forefront as well. The way the bass playing plays along with the piano in the fugue is they're almost matched in their volume and what they're doing as well. It's not what I'm used to hearing bass players do in prog bands. So I was, pretty impressed by that. I thought that was really good.
I actually feel bad that I've probably never given Greg as much due as I should for how good he is at bass. I think he started as a guitarist, but he's a very incredible bassist. I think it's just that his voice is truly like interstellar. So,
I think what was impressive to me about the way he's playing the bass there, it's not like he's, technical flurries and this, that. It's like he's directing the way the music moves. His choice of, what root notes are being played in and how that informs the sort of arrangement of the song. It feels like he's kind of the structural engineer of this. And then the piano is doing all the harmonic.
The diddly-doos, the textures and stuff.
Yeah, it feels clever. And I think it could wash over you and you not notice. It doesn't feel like, they're showing off, but they are.
Who do you think the target of the lyrics are? Why do you stare? Do you think that I care? Who do you think he's targeting?
Okay, so in a lot of his interviews, they talk about the music press that they got. And I was like, could that be it? Could he be like, God, we keep getting blasted by the press? And I feel like, because I think of ELP as very much the Kiss of prog, like they fill a similar niche in the prog world that Kiss does in the normal rock world. I wonder if they just got constantly spat on by the press.
I suppose they're kind of easy targets, aren't they? Because the whole bombastic thing, it's...
Yeah, like naturally hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, at first I thought it was almost like a romantic take. Like, why do you think I care? Like, maybe I thought it was ELP's Like a Rolling Stone. But, as it continues, it gets down to, I've ruled over the earth, witnessed my birth, cried at the side of a man, and I still don't know who I am. Which maybe that answers the question. We don't know who this is, but rule over the earth. So it's this God. I don't think they're a very religious band. I don't,
No.
And maybe he's talking about his own ego.
Yeah, no, actually, genuinely, because I've always taken this as the endless enigma is Greg Lake's kind of take on like the cosmic question. Like, who am I? What's my place in the universe? And why are the music press so mean? Like, I think it's kind of... There's all of those things going on together. But yeah, no, I don't know who he's singing to. To be fair to Greg Lake, well, actually, to not be fair to Greg Lake, actually. So the man loves him some rhyming couplets, and I think that leads to simplistic lyrics. I've said this before for other contexts, but my experience with ELP is the dog watching TV. I'm not sure I ever get them, but I get the emotions that they... that they flash in front of my face. I mean, in this case, the emotion is epicness. So you feel like you're witnessing the birth of the world or something like that. And later, when we talk about Trilogy, you're witnessing a tender scene. And when you're hearing from the beginning, it's, again, like a very a loved up song. Again, I think it's the traffic in bombast, which means that you get emotions turned up to 11, and you don't have to question it. But it also means the lyrics are kind of dumb. So.
You talking about it then, it was making me think you could almost see this music in a sort of Fantasia kind of animated.
Oh, yeah.
That whole birth of that evolution piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you mention that. So the mental image I have. So an Italian animator did a take on Fantasia in the 70s, I believe. It was an Italian animation studio, and they did Allegro non troppo, which is just the Italian version of Fantasia. And one of the songs they did was Bolero, and one of the things they did was the evolution of the world.
Wow.
And it's funny you should mention that. That's always the image that comes to mind with this, because I'm seeing, volcanoes going off, dinosaurs playing organs. All the classics.
That's amazing. I can totally envisage that.
And I think because they do a lot of touch points with classical music.
Well, I was going to say, as a kind of a segue into the next one, I feel like From the Beginning is a departure from the classical and a move into the more of the sort of Latin feel,
Yeah.
I find.
Yes. Which does move us then from the beginning. I was going to say, it absolutely has a kind of a Latin-y beat. I love that he alternates between strumming and arpeggio. Like, I think there's actually a lot of texture here.
I actually have the same thing in my notes. I was kind of expecting to hear, kind of classical guitar, that kind of Spanish flamenco-y guitar and sort of finger picking, but he doesn't. He's playing with a pick. The notes are all clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not the sound of the guitar and that's making it sound like that kind of Latin, Spanish flamenco-y thing. It's the way it's done, for any guitar players, that whole, when you play a bar chord, you take the bar finger off the neck and you let some of those open
Ring out
strings play. Yeah, it's that sort of type of harmonic thing going on.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of the way Jimmy Page approaches his acoustic guitar playing.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because we've got a transmission from Ryan.
Oh, right.
Who says for this song, the balance of power shifts back to the Greg show with an abundance of guitar work and the warm 70s FM vibe. It's got a warm and punchy sound, but it's a Greg song. And I was like, I think that's true. Like, it has that super, like, FM-y, classic rocky sound.
It's a very American acoustic guitar sound. It's a big Gibson, I think he plays a J200 or something.
Rich.
One of these big sort of Western vibed acoustic guitars. And you can hear that tension in the strings and stuff. It's, for a guitarist, this is, like, really nice.
Lovely song.
Really nice, yeah.
I have the same question, which is who is he writing to? It's an interesting transition because this is probably the most similar to Lucky Man I can think of in their ELP catalog. Mind you, it's quite limited, and I can't remember everything that happens in Love Beach, which I'm guessing there's some more romantic songs there. But it's good. I don't honestly have a ton to say about it. The only thing I thought was interesting I read was apparently this was proposed for in the Court of the Crimson King, but got rejected by Robert Fripp. I can't imagine it being on that album.
Yeah. No. This is a Greg song through and through, and I don't think it would have fit.
I'd say you can almost imagine Fripp not liking the idea of being kind of overshadowed with the guitar playing. Yeah,
that's probably true. And I also think Fripp would have ruined the song. I think he would have just gone to town on the guitar, and I think this needed to be the amount it was in terms of production. And actually, interestingly enough, so Greg produces all of ELP's albums. And I think this song especially, you notice Greg's production because it's only really Greg and some bongos and some, synthesizer from Keith, but really it's a Greg thing. And I think he does such a good job building the layers and each chorus. And I don't know, I think it's well orchestrated.
Yeah, it's a really good choice of a song to come in after that, the way Endless Enigma finishes.
Yeah.
And then you just hear that, sort of harmonic things just floating over the top at the beginning of this. The intro is just an utter 180 flip. It's such an iconic sound, beautiful. And, you mentioned the sort of the synthesizer bits in there. I feel like they're doing what you'd imagine the trumpet to be doing in that sort of Latin feel. And I really love that choice. There is no trumpet available. Let's do something much more interesting. That is prog.
Yeah. Filling your songs with an ungodly amount of synth. Fabulous. So we mosey on down to the Old West with The Sheriff. So this song is just a jaunty ragtime tale, kind of a Western story time, basically. And they start with a false start of Carl trying to do the intro fills and then just saying shit and then starting again, and they left it in. I love when they do stuff like that. I love when they capture studio banter.
Yeah, it didn't sound like he did anything wrong there to my ears. But yeah, but it did feel...
Well, he's too good for us, yeah.
Yeah, but it did feel kind of homely. It felt you were there with him, which is nice. Yeah,
it brings you into the song. And I think actually that's the point. I think it brings you into the song where you feel like you're part of it.
I don't know if this is considered a hot take, but this might be my favorite ELP song. It's so much fun. Okay. It's a pretty jarring transition. I can't say this is the smoothest transition from sort of the first third of the album into this paired with Hoedown as a bizarre middle layer of country. uh,
Yeah.
but I'm totally down for it. It's very fun. I think the playing is great. The lyrics are cool. I love the jam from Emerson on the keyboards. He's just doing the full ragtime experience. And even at the end, that kind of fun Joplin piece, I guess it really just shows you how talented he is beyond just the prog,
Yeah.
keyboard genre.
No, and I always think about with Emerson and ragtime. I think ragtime is so fun to play as a piano player. I bet he just was absolutely itching to put it in wherever he could. Like, if it could sound good, he'd throw it in. Because I think, he was a man, obviously, who enjoyed playing piano. And I think it is so inherently fun to play. I mean, you're 100% right. This is such a fun song. And it thus is fun to listen to. And I think I'm such a sucker for a well-done story song. And I just love the Wild West. Like, I think there's just something deep within me.
Everyone loves cowboys and stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
But, when this song first comes on, for me, it feels kind of off topic, and it's a bit, it's a bit too bright, a bit too joyful.
Do you think the shift between sides 1 and 2 is jarring? So we go from the beginning to the sheriff.
A bit, but I think I come to expect that from an ELP album. I feel like, in general, it's always a bit of a mismatch with them, because it's going from fun comedy songs to love songs to endless orchestra, classical music covers, and riffs.
Nothing surprises you now.
Yeah, I mean, is there an ELP album that is like one smooth concept?
No. that was easy. No, there was not.
But then, in the context of how the album progresses, you could almost play with the idea that this album's kind of becoming a bit of a Western concept album, because it's not just this song and the next song. There's sort of themes of kind of Western movies, like Western movie tropes that kind of come in, but I feel like it's approached from a different place. It's like you say, if you're a keyboard player and you know that honky tonk trope, it's fun to play. It almost feels like that came first, and the songs like melded around it. But I think that comes up again in a way that actually it's starting to feel like a theme, and I think that's what smooths it out and why it becomes joyful rather than just a jarring about turn. Yeah.
A jarring, hard shift. Like, obviously, as you say, it's a honky-tonk song, but they use the same sonic palette. So it's still the organs, still the drums, and still Greg Lake's magnificent voice. I think it coheres within the album. And I also think, on the note of Greg Lake's voice, I think this album gave Greg Lake a chance to shine in his full variety of vocal performances in a way that we haven't heard since In the Court of the Crimson King. Because the man actually has a bunch of different tones he can use, but most of the time he's just shouting. And I feel like this album, he got to do some tender, he got to do some epic, and he got to do some fun. And it was joyful for me to hear, all the different faces of Greg.
Yeah, he does do the shout thing, doesn't he?
Oh, he shouts. Yeah.
I feel Genesis vibes when he does that.
Yeah.
And I'd say I don't like it so much.
No.
I'd prefer his other
styles.
faces, yeah.
In a weird way, I think Greg Lake is, and this is probably not controversial, but I think he's slightly underrated as a vocalist. I just think he doesn't have as many times to shine as he should, because there's either endless instrumentals or weird uses of his voice. Yeah. Whereas I think we said about this on the debut, but it's like, I wish there was more of Lucky Man, that version of him and that version of ELP. And it's nice to see it come out, but I could always use more.
Yeah, I feel like you get a pretty good amount on this album, but you are absolutely right. I want more Greg. And actually, interestingly, we got another transmission from Ryan. So he says, interesting turn to take, romantic, fun little tale of the American West. Was this something that had its heyday in UK culture at this point, so early 1970s?
I think globally, you could say, other than maybe war films, this was the most popular genre from like the 50s to the 70s, just in general.
Yeah. And I guess it's probably true both sides of the Atlantic as well.
Yeah. I mean, and just also think about the pure number of movies. They were just pumping Westerns out everywhere. I mean, you have obviously the American Westerns, you have the spaghetti Westerns, you have Westerns produced in Spain, which they, and this is true, they call paella Westerns.
I'll be darned. I had no idea. Huh. And I was going to say, I guess, like, also just to keep in mind that these guys are like 22.
Yeah.
You know, they were children in 1950.
I think if we were in their shoes making music at that age in our lives, I think our references would be like Marvel movies.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of those, you know, movies I'm now soured on as an older person and also just exhausted by, and they might feel the same way, you know, after 15th Western in a row and Thanos shows up in the saloon, you know, eventually you're just going to get...
And now we're under the spaghetti marvels.
From a film lover's perspective, I always see the spaghetti westerns as more of a doffing the cap to the sort of Japanese cinema, which previously was doffing its cap to the kind of, you know, 50s American cinema. So it's like this weird kind of thing. But I think that's it.
Culture is cyclical.
Yeah, it's a very different thing. But I believe in, you know, when those films were coming out, they weren't considered to be particularly good right off the bat. I think it was something that people got excited about later on. Yeah. I think what's interesting about those movies is the way they approach the music is very different.
Yeah,
I suppose all movies in the 50s were westerns at that period, and they always had these huge orchestras playing the theme music, and then, you know,
shave it down to a little rock band.
Yeah, and then you get to the 60s and it shrinks down for the spaghetti westerns, and then ELP come along and they're doing their idea of you know, the music you'd hear in a Western movie in this album. And it's got Moog synthesizers and, like, you know, Hammond organ and stuff. It's like, what's going on here? Yeah. So it's gone full to a new place, you know. And it definitely has not been done like this before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's bold to have one song, but two is pretty crazy.
Two is madness.
Yeah, can you imagine if it was just like The Sheriff and then, you know, there's no hoedown? Yeah. I think it would be a strange little footnote, but two is pretty bananas.
Well, and as thankfully for us, there is a hoedown, and that's the next song on the album. Hoedown was the fifth movement in an Aaron Copland ballet called Rodeo. As Ryan says, it is the most fun track on the entire album. It's Keith taking over again. And I will never forget trying to play this with Ian and him clutching his hands afterwards like he tried to write a novel using crayon. Someday I'll actually have to see Aaron Copland's Rodeo. This is a big, warm synth bath. I agree with everything in that sentence. Yeah, I was going to say, you're absolutely right, that I think if it was just The Sheriff, you'd be like, that was a fun diversion. And then this song is, like, it takes all of the things we love about ELP, as in massive organ swells and crazy, like, kind of fun, exciting classical music, you know, from a Western source, so to speak. And it's such a good coda to the Sheriff. And I think I'm, like, Pavlovian trained that when the starts, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so goddamn excited.
Do you know, this kind of reminded me of when I was a kid getting our first keyboard, and it had these sort of cartridges you pushed into the thing. And on that cartridge was like all these MIDI files of all this sort of, you know, kind of showing off what the keyboard could do. And I feel like this has that flavour. It's it's almost like Emerson's like showing off the things he can do with
all
the equipment.
The things, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I got Hammond the other day and it's doing this, and I've got the Moog 3C over here. Listen to the noise. Oh, listen to that. Whoa. You know, it's
like a sampler pack in the song.
It really feels like it's almost like he's on the marketing payroll for Moog.
Yeah.
And it's beautifully jaunty and stuff. And you've gotten used to that kind of Western trope thing. You know, you've had 2 songs of it now, so you feel comfortable with the idea. It's not off topic anymore. And then it just goes into space.
Yeah.
At the end of the song.
Off the cliff.
And wow, yeah, just incredible.
No, again, this was one I could feel that Keith Emerson would have been chomping at the bit to play. Like, it's so fun. I can actually speak from personal experience. It's so fun to play on piano. Like, it just has such a good swing to it.
You know, it's this song that made me think that this is something to be performed in front of people. You know, you want to see lights doing stuff, and yes, it sounds great on the album, but it's not a song on its own right as such. This is something to be performed and
on the most massive stage.
Yeah, and you know, on that topic, I was reading about the stack of speakers they'd have on stage on tour with them. There's like about 50.
I mean, I think we're coming into the era where they've got the 3 trucks labeled Emerson, Lake and Palmer, where they've got the Persian rugs. I don't know if it's this album or the next one, but Carl Palmer's going to have a hand-engraved stainless steel drum set that is, I think, weighs 2 tons or something insane.
Why not?
You know, yeah, exactly. But I think they're reaching the peak excess, and you can see clips from their 1971 concert. So that's even 1 year before this. They're already putting on like massive 2-story tall stage shows. Yeah, I mean, this type of music fits right in. Speaking of stage shows, so Rodeo the Ballet, I was like, what could this be as a ballet? Like, I just couldn't imagine it. Because I've heard the song, like it's a famous song in America. Like, you know, the normal classical song, Hoedown. I'm assuming you don't have hidden knowledge about this.
Other than the fact it was popular. Like, just again, that's what was popular in the era. And this is just a guess, but this might have been an attempt to meld high and lowbrow art. I mean, I think Westerns really were like the Marvel films of their time, right? It was just what the masses liked. And then the snooty people were still listening to classical and things. So it might have been an interesting way to try to fuse those. The stage melding with the popular.
And I mean, also, interestingly, so it's 1942 is when Rodeo the Ballet came out. I wonder if there's some sort of patriotic drive thing going on there. You know, like putting America's best foot forward type of thing. Like we're making American music for American audiences. I don't know, something like that. Anyways, if anyone out in the ether knows the story of Rodeo, the ballet, let us know. helloprogfrog@gmail.com. Yeah, lo and behold, I watched some clips of Rodeo, the ballet, on the old YouTubes. And it's funny because they either have a man with jeans on the bottom, which I was like, that seems really hard to ballet in, or with the jean shirt and then ballet tights on the bottom.
Wow.
So, yeah, they incorporated denim into the ballet outfit, and that's a big ask.
That's going to be the first time that's been done.
But it, you know, honestly, to their credit, it kind of works because it's you know, they do it as like a ballet slash, I guess, kind of lion dancey thing. It's a song, yeah, but it's a song that could be played on a fiddle.
I wrote down exactly one note. Hell yeah.
Oh boy.
I don't have much else to say beyond what's already been said, because this is so much fun. I have the same reaction as you, Ian, where I was just like, yes, like, it's so much fun. Follow up about the stage show. You can find clips from their 73 tour on YouTube. And I believe you pointed this out once, Ian, many, many moons ago, but Emerson looks like he's wearing Klingon battle armor. So this is probably that too, with a giant bottle of wine sitting on the ski boards. Like a magnum. So this is probably that era of the excess. I think we're in the thick of it.
Yeah, pure excess. Oh, fantastic.
Now I know what's missing in my life. Klingon battle armor.
Well, I was going to say, because I think obviously Rick Wakeman had already claimed the sequin cape. And so Keith Emerson was like, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to stand out in the lineup? Fabulous. So we then come to Trilogy, a tender and then quite epic little come down. So Ryan says this is actually my favorite track. The lyrics start as a pretty trite breakup song, but the delivery is great. And other than the longer instrumental siegs that wouldn't really work on stage, I could see the vocals delivered as part of a Broadway show where the characters realize their romance is over. I understand why it is the title track. Every single person gets their time in the sun to shine, and it would have been a blast to see this live. And I'd say, yeah, 100%. Like, I think again, on the theme of Greg's vocal range, I think he gets a chance to show off both sides of his tender and his epic.
Yeah, it's just a real great vocal performance there. It's beautiful.
The structure that I wrote down was Greg on his own, the band on his own, and then it all comes together, which I think is kind of symbolic of their career at this point. Because I think they've done well on their own, but they haven't really come together in the first two albums. So this, to me, as it's already been said, it all comes together perfectly.
That is real deep, yeah. And I think this is absolutely true for this song, especially where you're right. I feel like it finally sounds like Keith Emerson wrote some music and Greg sang on it, and not they're working at cross ends all the time.
Yeah, I feel like the journey this takes you, you can't say anyone's stealing the limelight here. It seems to just pull to everyone's strengths, definitely. I love the sound of the Moog in the beginning of it. I think we're used to hearing that sort of quality of sound from something like a mellotron or something, but I think that's the first time you hear something that's electrically generated signal, and it sounds like real strings. It's got like a gentle wobble that's
almost organic.
Yeah, it's quite convincing for something of that era, and I think to have this piece of equipment, the Moog 3C, I think is like that's the big boy, to take that on tours is a bold thing to do, but they're using that along with a load of other stuff in the studio, so they have to, I guess, and it's a big part of this song. And then you're hearing this, the straight piano parts that are they're just gorgeous, aren't they? You get to see that sort of more traditional range, and you just feel like you're settling into that kind of Night at the Proms kind of scenario, and then the Martians land and steal your underwear. It just goes wild again. And at the end of that sort of segment, it goes back to that sort of, how you mentioned that the sort of the songwriting it kind of had that sort of simplistic rhyming couplets. It kind of reminded me a little bit of John Lennon, that sort of ending section, which I kind of liked. You feel like you've gone on enough of a journey at that point, and then you get this kind of electric carnival thing. Again, a bit more of that Latin rhythm as well. So you've seen the classical element in the midsection, you've heard the Martians land, and then you've had some of this Latin flavour. It's
a kind of Latin flavour riding you out.
It is a trilogy of sound.
Oh man, that's another deep point. Whoa.
It's just where it goes, yeah. It's just
No, I think to the point of like kind of the Latin beats at the end, I think it's so obvious to me that everyone had a very good time making this album. Like, you can actually hear that it's a band who enjoyed every part of this, because I think, as I say, Greg got to sing a bunch of different stuff. I think Keith got to play a bunch of fun stuff. And obviously Carl must have had a blast doing all of this.
The Latin stuff shows a real sophistication in that rhythm section, because it's not like, it's just fun to play. That's hard to play, especially when you've got musicians from a more like traditional classic and sort of rock background to play these sort of more syncopated rhythms that is a more of a feat, I think.
Yeah. I talked about this in a previous ELP episode, but I think Carl plays to the song so beautifully. I feel like Carl's never too loud or too much. He is a lot, but he blends in with all the craziness around him and supports Greg and supports Keith.
Yeah, I think it's only the beginning of The Sheriff that I kind of really notice he's doing a thing.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. He's in the background somewhere, but like then when you listen to it, it's like, oh my God, it fills in the song so much.
Yeah, it really is great.
So then we come to the unfortunate two last tracks, which I do not recommend to anyone. So these are Living Sin and Abaddon's Bolero. So Living Sin, I believe, was a story about a groupie or something. I don't really know. And then Abaddon's Bolero was a bolero that was just a long, slow build. Neither of these songs do I recommend that much.
There's more to be said on them than that, I think. But
if you want to say anything, feel free to defend either one.
I've got thoughts, but yeah,
okay.
They are less enjoyable, definitely. I actually quite like some stuff about Abaddon's Bolero, but Living Sin, I don't feel comfortable listening to that. I feel quite dirty.
It's uneasy. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to take a shower after
Yeah.
that. It's almost like a poor attempt at like a Cream song.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But there is a bit in that that sounds like it would have been a chorus in a Cream song that I actually thought that could work, but they just don't grab onto that section. Yeah, like I say, it's where a chorus might sit if they weren't a prog band, but they just touch on it and then move on. And it was the only bit I enjoyed. And
Like it needed to be a normal rock song, is what you're saying, but then it wasn't, and it was awful.
Didn't enjoy that one, no.
No, Abaddon Bolero, it's just one very long building solo, and that's fine.
It does start with that again, that Western theme. You know, the drums and the little pipe. The little pipe is the Moog again, I think, but it still has that feel. But then I think where it takes me and takes my memories is to playing on the Nintendo 64. It just sounds like the intro section to Star Fox is about to come in.
Yeah.
And then just as I'm starting to, actually, that's fun. I remember that. It just goes into Zelda. Yeah, there's definitely some Nintendo flavors here.
So Ryan says it feels like the closing credits. But again, like it's the closing credits. I don't feel like it's an integral part to the album. It's interesting that they added this like extra 10 minutes of whatever, because Trilogy ends amazingly. Like Trilogy, fantastic ending. And then that's where I personally end this album, where I'm like, well, I'm completely satisfied.
I guess that's the thing with vinyl, isn't it? I think you have to end when the vinyl ends. You can't just end where you want to end.
Yeah.
But you could have put Trilogy at the end of the album. I suppose. Yeah. I don't know.
Livingston is the only song I could figure out who they were speaking to, because if you do read the lyrics, it's pretty clear it is against some crazy groupie. But which made me think about in all of the prog rock bands we've talked about, groupies doesn't come up very often. Is this the one? Like, are they all too busy at Led Zeppelin concerts, or where are they?
When we talked about Cadence and Cascade and In the Wake of Poseidon, I think ELP is genuinely a stadium band, and I think they are the closest to mass market success. And I'm sure all the trappings of touring life that come along with that. But again, it's just, I think like Ed even brought this up, like it's such a weird and gross song. Like I was like, maybe these guys just like, there's not that oozing sexuality that Robert Plant has, where you're kind of happy in his hands.
Greg Lake does the whole shirt open thing, doesn't he? He's a rare shirt open man for the prog scene.
In the prog world. Yeah, he's a specimen. But I was going to say, I think as well, I feel like they put more stock in the passion of like learning new classical songs rather than the life of touring. But yeah, no, it is not a subject that really comes up in prog.
I got to admit, I didn't know what a bolero was until preparing for this podcast, because Abaddon's bolero sounds metal as hell, and then you listen to the song, it's beep, 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 beep. I agree with what you said, Ed. It does sound like Star Fox cue music, or waiting music. I don't hate it though. I mean, to me, it's kind of, it's fine. It's not like cat food that I actively loathe.
I feel like I've sat through hours of this playing Zelda already, so it did actually conjure nice memories for me.
If there's something going on over it, I think it was something I'd completely have in the background of Zelda, but I think it's like if you're just listening to it as a song, it feels like incidental music. And I think because it endlessly builds, it just kind of builds and builds and builds. It doesn't go anywhere, it just builds.
Yeah, whereas everything else has got some kind of transition into a really obvious next section. Yeah, it's almost like there's too many layers. So I feel like this is another example where kind of Greg's bass is kind of taking you, and then the synth is doing the lines. The bass line is taking you from the transitions, the chordal transitions, and he's doing that very nicely. And then the layers of synth, they're just building. And I think this is the one where you have the most layers of synth for the longest period of time. So maybe that's why it doesn't grab you so much. It's as if you've kind of, you get like a bit of like fatigue.
Yeah. Your ears get tired.
Yeah, there's like a complexity fatigue. It's just too much for too long, and you stop listening. It's a sad place to go at the end of such an interesting album.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Oh.
What's the deal with the album cover?
Okay, so
it hurts. It hurts to look at. What is it?
So, oddly enough, it is a Hypnosis album cover. Hypnosis being, of course, the graphics team that came up with all of Pink Floyd's classic albums, Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, etc. I do not know what's going on here. For those who have, I'm really hoping you've seen this, it is just the three of them looking sexy and shirtless.
Well, it's like they've tried to do that, but it just looks, I don't know.
It's incorrect.
Yeah, it looks like it's been painted by like an art student.
Yep.
Not someone who's finished learning their art. It just isn't sexy. It looks broken. They look broken somehow. They look like broken men. Not sexy men.
I mean, it's an interesting choice. I understand, obviously, it's the trilogy, it's the three of them. But yeah, I don't know why they went with sexy men.
I think the Hypnosis album covers, they are quite 50-50 split between incredibly iconic and just rubbish.
Yeah.
Did they do the Tarkus one as well?
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so.
Because that's equally weird, isn't it?
It kind of reminds me actually a little bit of the Oliver Cromwell painting that he wanted the warts and all. Like they could have made them look a little sexier. Like, Ian, if we ever are painted for this podcast, I'm going to insist we look better than this.
Okay.
Do you know what that really should be?
It's actually in your writer.
Yes.
And
to be clear, I don't think we're necessarily more handsome than them, but I just want to look better.
No, and actually, because I think they are incredibly handsome dudes, I think, yeah, you're right. This is just a very weird art student painting. And it's funny because I think with their debut with the beautiful dove and all that, but then Tarkus is like something drawn by a child. And again, I love that album cover, but for those who have not seen it, it is a armadillo that is fighting a tank, and it seems to be drawn in colored pencil by about a 5-year-old, and it's wonderful.
It just seems odd to pair that artwork with the sort of record sales attached to the album.
Yeah.
It's just I can't marry those two things together. It's just insane.
Because I think the next perplexing bit, so according to legend, Salvador Dali was offered the chance to paint this album, but he asked too much money. And that would have been incredible. Because, as we all well know, their next album, Brain Salad Surgery, will be an H.R. Giger painting. We'll save that for another episode, but it is one of the truly, truly iconic prog rock album covers. Mm. So it's funny that they went off with the dud here.
Wow. If only they'd paid the guy. If only they paid him.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine having that in your...
Like H.R. Giger, Salvador Dali.
Yeah. Oh, what a miss. And then the weird Tarkus one. What?
I was just happy to be included, guys.
So, Ed, are you saying that their three faces are more horrifying than H.R. Giger's Eldritch Nightmares? Like... Well, you know what's crazy is, you probably didn't know this, but when Ridley Scott made Alien, before he went to H.R. Giger, he went to the guy that did this album cover, because the Alien was originally going to just look like Keith Emerson. And they had to settle for, the one we know today.
Brilliant.
Interestingly, I wonder if this is like a synesthesia thing, but I always associate the first album with just like kind of muddy water and like Take a Pebble and all that. Then I associate this album with wood because it's got the woody whatever. And I feel like it's also a very acoustic-y album, though that's probably not true. And then the next one, H.R. Giger, I associate with metal.
Interesting.
But like sonically as well. I don't think it's actually true. I think I've made that up in my head.
I feel like this is kind of fluty, windy, airy sounds.
It feels fluty. Like, yeah, it feels like there's woodwind and it feels like there's like piano, so like a earthy whatever. And the next one feels creepy. I
feel like I've talked about the Moog quite a bit with this album. I guess that's because that's what jumped out at me. But there's loads of the Hammond on there, the Hammond organ on there as well.
Yeah.
And obviously there's some beautiful piano pieces. But I think what you hear the most throughout this whole album is the windy, pipey sounds of the Moog, the sort of haunting, wobbly sounds. I know there's some wild stuff as well, but I think that's the comforty, happy, medium sound. So, I get the kind of wind vibes for this one, I think.
Yeah. Warm, gemütlichkeit. So this album comes back to a tragedy of ELP that we get time and time again, and that is the lack of focus. So I get the sense that Keith Emerson especially was constantly distracted and like adding stuff in all the time. And I feel like unlike Yes or Genesis, where they do variety and length, song length, in a way that delights me, and certainly I don't even notice how long the songs are because they delight me so much, I think Keith and Greg switching back and forth so much is kind of whiplashy. And then I also think you go from 0 to 100 all the time. You never groove in ELP. You start at 0, then you go up to 100. Maybe you come back down to 0. But like I feel like you're whiplashing between Keith and Greg and 0 and 100. I feel like they're too stadium level to handle multi-parted long songs.
Yeah, I feel like the only piece on this that feels like it's what you want, what you've described, that what you need is the from the beginning. That feels like it's got a balanced structure to it.
Yes.
And I think everything else lacks that. You could argue, actually, that the Sheriff's got a balanced structure because you know where it's going. Well, you think you know where it's going. Obviously, there's a few weird bits thrown in, but that's got, albeit a strange structure, it doesn't surprise you with where it's going. But yeah, I think you're right. The rest just seem to kind of... The music just kind of goes where it's going. There's no one reining it in. There's no sort of management person in there to sort of... I guess maybe that's something they had missing with the band dynamic. Maybe they needed someone to be in there.
Like editorializing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when we were talking about the Beatles and how much the people in the studio were like part of the creative process when they're making their albums. Did they have access to anyone like that when they were doing this stuff? Or was it just, like you say, you know, if you've got... Was it Greg Lake who was doing most of the production?
So Greg Lake produced. Amazingly, they had super producer Eddie Offord, who worked as the producer for Yes, as the engineer on these songs.
I'd say that explains everything.
So I think because they sound amazing. I think it's just that in terms of like compositional choices, I think it's mostly driven by Keith Emerson, and I think that definitely led to some wild and wacky times.
Yeah, I think it does help to have a strong outsider voice to rein in
some of your more exuberant indulgences.
Progmen.
I guess I'll say this, and this is something I said in another ELP episode. I think they are stadium music, so they're for everyone. And I think there's an element there, as you're right, where I have such a personal connection to Yes, and kind of to Genesis and to King Crimson, and then obviously to Pink Floyd. I connect with them soul to soul. I think ELP, I would absolutely, drop of the hat, have seen them live. Like, no question. But I don't think they're as, like, me alone in a room with headphones type of like personal band. So I agree with you that I understand why you wouldn't connect with them. I also think they get in their way quite a bit, where I think, yes, you can just enjoy the album. Like you can put it on, you can go all the way through with most of their albums, like most of their good albums. I think ELP, I think it's just like, just when you're sinking into the endless enigma, then he's like, okay, time for a piano fugue. And you're just whipped. And you're like, what happened? And so I feel like you almost can never relax around ELP.
Never relax around ELP. Never drop your guard. Never drop that guard.
But legitimately.
I feel like any band that sort of is kind of pushing their musicality at you rather than drawing you in tends to sit uneasy. And then you never like connect with them on a emotional level if someone's pushing their music at you. And I feel like that's what's going on. You know, like I alluded to that with the Sheriff and the Hoedown, how like it sounds like a demo for the equipment, doesn't it? And that is the sound of someone showing what they can do rather than enticing you into the narrative of the song, which is something those other bands you mentioned are so very good at, especially Floyd, what it is that makes them part of your
personal life as well.
Yeah, what makes them, personal to you is that you can connect with something that they're saying. I don't feel like there's ever really a theme, at least lyrically, here that I've gone, oh, I felt that. Or
what's really interesting about what you said is somehow, even Yes, with their completely nonsensical lyrics, I still feel like they're singing to me. I get something in there. You're right, I don't get that with ELP. Mm. But I think it's stuff that they're very much just all interested in. I'm just never quite sure, if they're trying to loop you, the listener, in.
Yeah.
Like, I never sing an ELP lyric to myself. They've got perfectly fine lyrics, but they feel closer to placeholders. Whereas both Pink Floyd and Yes, I'm like, oh, I totally know what you're talking about. Like, you're singing to me, man.
I think secretly all of us are self-centered and selfish enough to think maybe there's going to be a movie of my life at some point.
Okay.
I would never want ELP to be narrating my life, whereas I think you could work Yes and Pink Floyd into different stages of my memoirs.
So we're doing a Mamma Mia style biopic of Brian, but with Yes songs.
It would be the first Broadway show to have negative ticket sales.
Oh dear.
I don't know if I could ever love ELP in the same way I love Yes or Pink Floyd. And I don't know what that is. It's interesting, just like all music, you kind of know a little bit about each musician, like where they're from, their background. I don't know that much about the three of them. Not that obviously I'm sure I could just Google it, but I don't know if their experiences and their personalities really show through like in other bands.
Yeah. So I'm going to chuck this out to you real quick. So we've just done Fragile and Metal. And I was thinking, actually, how does Trilogy compare to those other two albums? Both kind of, in the context of prog in general, and then in relation to their respective bands' catalogs. So I'd say Metal is very obviously, as we had said in the Metal episode, just a kind of a clearinghouse. Like, they're just getting rid of their kind of older material, getting ready to become the Pink Floyd we know and love. I feel like Trilogy actually functions in kind of the same way as Fragile, where it is arguably their best album in their own catalog, but it presages their masterpiece, which is coming up. Now, I think for me personally, I think Fragile's a little bit here and there, and then Close to the Edge is just one of the best albums of all time. I think Trilogy is a better album than Brain Salad Surgery, but I think you can argue that Brain Salad Surgery is kind of the closest ELP will ever come to their like Dark Side or Close to the Edge or whatever, like just their masterpiece. So I would say Trilogy and Fragile kind of function the same for me, as like we're almost there. But I say all three of those, Metal, Fragile, and Trilogy, are what I call tapas albums, where there's like fun tasters of what the band can do.
I would agree with that. Although the only thing I'd say, at least when you bring in Fragile, I would argue at the very least for Yes, and maybe even ELP, I think they've kind of found their sound. And both albums are representations of it, whereas I think Pink Floyd isn't quite there yet.
No, I would say that's definitely true. And that's why I'd say Fragile and Trilogy are siblings and Metal's a weird cousin.
Yeah. Some are late bloomers. What can you say?
Some are late bloomers.
I mean, if you think about it, it took Pink Floyd significantly longer to get to their classic sound than certainly Yes, and probably ELP as well. Just looking at Pink Floyd, you have Piper, Saucer, Ummagumma, Atom Heart Mother, Metal. So that's at least 4 albums. And then you have like the 2 soundtrack albums, More and Obscured by Clouds. So that you could either say 5 or 7 albums to get to Dark Side.
Yeah. I mean, I think it might have just been that the other bands just functioned as bands where they, wrote and recorded music together as bands. Whereas I think Pink Floyd needed Roger Waters to kind of come online and start directing them.
Us late bloomers are, they bloom the brightest in the end.
They bloom the hardest. Fabulous. So here's a quick question for you. And you actually kind of talked about it with ELP's jarring whatever. I feel like albums are always better if there's at least a loose concept. This album does feel completely random. And doing this podcast made me realize that concept albums, even if they're super loose, just make more satisfying albums.
Yeah, it's interesting because Trilogy, depending on who you ask, maybe their best album, maybe it's Brain Salad Surgery. So in a weird way, because of how much of a mismatch, it almost feels like a greatest hits, right? It's just like, oh, this is good, this is good, this is good.
Yeah, ooh,
but it's not like it fits together.
Yeah, I actually really like what you're saying there.
But yeah, all that being said, I'm glad I've spent the time to listen through to it a few times and get to know the songs a bit and making notes while I was listening to it made me notice things about it I probably wouldn't have done if I'd just had this playing in the background. That would have been maybe the only time I heard it, maybe just the one time. I don't know if I would have re-listened to it like I did. But sitting with the headphones on and hearing the way it was mixed and stuff, I did actually enjoy the experience, and I'm glad I spent the time with it.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I'll quote Ryan again here. So Ryan's coming in, and he said it's legitimately fun to watch these guys just wail on their instruments without much ado. And it doesn't wander as much as other groups obsessed with improvisation. And I think both of those things are true for this album, minus Abaddon's Bolero. I will say it is just like, this is an album I could feel the fun they had in the studio. And actually, then this is my grand thesis about ELP in general. I just love that they all reached for the absolute edge of greatness. Like, you could feel that they pushed each other to the maximum. Sometimes the maximum's too far, but they went to the maximum every time, and that's a joy to watch from the sidelines.
Yeah, they certainly reached for the skies, didn't they?
And sometimes you fall in the clouds. So that was Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Trilogy, and this has been a sort of young person's guide to prog rock. I have been your host, Ian Prize, and I want to thank my guests, Ed, Brian, and the Ghost of Ryan. Do follow us on ProgFrog Pod at Instagram, and if you have any longer thoughts or queries, find us on helloprogfrog@gmail.com. So, hot off this album, Emerson, Lake and Palmer would be right back in the studio to make 1973's Brain Salad Surgery, where they're going to take their style to its logical extreme, including even more synthesizers, and in fact tackling a full sci-fi mini-opera. Hooray! But I think we can all agree on one thing. All of these songs are too damn short. So next time, we rejoin Jethro Tull for their 40-minute-long song/album, Thick as a Brick. We'll see you then.